Here's the sink. 3, 2, 1, sink. Good morning, paddlers everywhere. This is Gary again with another crap paddling video from the California Center for Research on Advanced Paddling. And I think this one is particularly interesting and rewarding for me. See what you think about it. Some people may recall a conversation on the Facebook surfski kayak group that I started, I think it was January 2nd of this year, 2022, where it had to do with how I learned to love the patient long stroke. And that came about because all of the coaching advice I've seen is if you're paddling surfski or kayak with a wing blade, what you want to do is put a lot of downward force at the beginning of the catch and keep the stroke short. Start taking the blade out around your knees so it's out completely by your hips. And that wasn't working for me in my Nello 520. Even using the baby Yantex blade, 600 square centimeter blades, at the very short length of 190 centimeters, because soon as I put in downward force at the beginning, my heart rate would go up above my calculated maximum aerobic function, or MAF, which I calculated as 120. I used 180 minus my age, the standard formula, and then added 10 back in for various reasons. So that's about it was 121, and then I hit 70 in February, 120. And so the only way I found, even with such a small baby blade, to keep my heart rate at 120 was to do what I call the long patient stroke, which is what I'm doing now. So no downward force, and don't worry about taking the blade out. Just let it come right around as far as you want, whatever it takes to get my heart rate at 120 or a little bit above, sometimes 125. So I've been doing that, since the beginning of the year, if not from before that, about 4 hours a week, basically all low intensity, 120, 125 heart rate, and that's how I started out with a patient long stroke. I've been keeping my heart rate at that 120, 125 for all these last months. And then a few days ago, I made a discovery. And the discovery was saying, ooh, it feels like I'm adding downward pressure here to get my heart rate up to 120, 125. So I made a conscious effort, as I'm doing now, with the long patient stroke I started with, and I found that I couldn't get my heart rate past like 110. So right now, this is how I would have been paddling, and that was with the smaller Yantex blade. I'm now using the Epic small mid 735 square centimeter blades at 200 centimeters length. So this is a significantly heftier paddle. And even with this, if I do the patient long stroke, I sort of top out about 106, 107. And yet I was paddling at 120, 125. So what I realized is that I had, without my realizing it, until recently, I had been adding in more downward pressure at the beginning of the stroke. And I'm going to do that now. I'm going to do what it takes to get my heart rate up to 120. It's now 112, 114, and I can feel, definitely, I'm adding downward pressure. 117, still keeping the stroke long. 118, moving at 10.4 kilometers an hour. Get a 6 not tailwind. 119, 120. So there's 120. Now, if I paddle like this at the beginning of the year, my heart rate would have been 130, 135. And I have been keeping it at 120, so my stroke naturally evolved into a stroke with downward pressure. Interesting. And hopefully I'm going faster now at my MAF of 120 or 120, 125. At least that's the idea. Now, I don't think I've done anything to shorten the stroke, but let's see what happens if I do that. Okay, let me tell you now, about 64 stroke rate. Okay, let me shorten it up. Consciously, downward pressure, keeping it shorter. 124, 125, 127, 120, 130. And I'm now at 78 stroke rate. So I suspect, I'm going to back off now, I suspect that if I continue to develop fitness, the next thing I will have to do to keep my heart rate at 120 will be to shorten the stroke. So I'm spending more time with force on the stroke. So now I've added force to the beginning of the stroke, but I still are using long strokes. So there's a little bit of recovery at the end of each stroke where I'm not applying much force, and then I'll gradually eliminate that. And I think that will just naturally happen by focusing on heart rate. So there you go. So I find that interesting. Now, will I really continue to improve in fitness now that I'm at the age of 70? Well, I hope perhaps a little bit more. But if I paddle back, continue to paddle throughout my 70s, into my 80s, maybe even into my 90s, there's going to be a time, I suppose, where just the general age-related decline will take away some of that fitness, and for me to hit my MAF now at 80, my MAF as I adjust it would be 110. So I may be going back at some point to the patient, no downward force long stroke at some point when I age, but maybe not. We will see. Of course, one way of keeping the downward force would be to go to smaller and smaller paddles, maybe a 550 square centimeter. Don't want to make it too short because then I lose the power stroke. I lose some of the, well, that's a whole nother thing. But there may be that I can go with a even smaller paddle. Or maybe I'll go back to the baby Jantex because now I'm using the Epic. And that will give me some cushion where I can keep the downward force. So there you go. So for coaches and people coaching themselves, sort of two approaches for starting off paddlers. One would be the standard accepted way of saying, no, you got to get downward force at the beginning. You got to keep the stroke short. And that may make perfect sense for fit people who have an MAF of 180 minus their age of 160 or something like that. Probably no way they can get their heart up to their 160 by using a patient and long stroke. But for someone starting out with less fitness or older, as in my case, I wouldn't say less fitness, less paddling technique certainly, but older, I started in my 60s, now at 70. I think it makes sense to do what it takes to get your MAF. Stay there. And in my case, I just sort of naturally, as I develop paddling fitness, from doing virtually nothing but low intensity MAF paddles, at least for the last 5-6 months, I actually, for my whole paddling career, really, I've never really done high intensity interval workouts, although that will change soon. I think it makes sense to consider the patient long cruising stroke with the wing paddle. And that's what I'm doing now. Always feels good. I think that's sort of what you see sprint kayakers do when they're paddling to the starting line or warming up or paddling away from the finish line after competing. They do a very low angle too. They bring their angle down, and I don't think they're using much downward force at all. And so maybe that's the type of stroke you might, oh, I just hit the bottom. You might try, instead of trying to imitate the sprinters when they're flying at super high cadence, at super high speed for 200 or 500 or 1,000 meters. So anyway, those are my thoughts and what I've learned, and I hope you find that useful. Next thing I want to do is see if I have an MAF time trial from before at 120 and do that again, because that time trial would have been with little if any downward force, and now I'm adding downward force for the same heart rate, and see if I am really going faster. Again, wind and waves and currents make that hard to compare. I wish I had a watt meter for my paddle. Maybe I'll do that at some point. So those are some thoughts, and I think this is really exciting. And one of the reasons why I'm dedicating more of my time to paddling than cycling now. I mean, I'll never cycle as fast or as good as I used to in my 40s, but I think, as I've demonstrated, even in my 70s, my paddling fitness and technique has been improving, and we'll see how far I can take that. So there you go with another water breaking paddling video, a crap video from the California Center for Research on Advanced Paddling. Until the next time, goodbye.